Back to the show. Cooper Chronicles Volume 1, Interview Volume 1, his return to the channel, actually. Drew H. Beeson. It feels like we've just been shouting each other out in solo content later, so there's a chance for the audience to see that, like, yeah, we actually do know each other and we do videos together. So
we do.
He's back. Last time we did Sighting In on the Zodiac Killer, which was epic. This time we are doing the Paratrooper of Fortune, the story of Ted B. Braden, and it's pretty awesome. We briefly talked about the Cooper incident, Skyjacking Incident, 1971, at the end of our Zodiac interview last time, and I was amazed after talking to Drew behind the scenes that, like, there's like nothing on DB Cooper on YouTube. Like, I was blown away. I couldn't believe it, quite frankly. I mean, I get Zodiac is more sensationalized with the movie and the Graysmith, but this is just as crazy to me. So there's a couple documentaries out there. We talked about them, but I don't know. I just thought there'd be a lot more. that's where I'm at on this.
You gotta hunt for it a little bit. Like the Cooper Vortex by Darren Schaefer is fantastic, and I think you've just been on a binge listen to that, that's a great education right there.
Yep. I checked out. I think you've been on there a few times, and I checked out
twice. Yeah.
Yep. I checked out, I think, the first one. Darren is amazing too. He's really good.
Great.
Obviously,
he's fantastic.
Knows his stuff. But yeah, this is an amazing topic. Quite frankly, like, there's I don't really like any of the suspects that are out there, at least the mainstream ones, you know what I mean, that are regurgitated by anything that you would look up on DB Cooper. But I guess I'll just do my book report just to start us off. I really like what Drew did here in Paratrooper of Fortune. You really didn't do what I expected. Not that I expected you to, but what I expected a DB Cooper book to do, which is just like, I'm going to blow up Flight 305, and that's all I'm going to talk about, and just, the events of the flight and blah, blah, blah. I mean, you could pretty much find those anywhere. Of course, Unsolved Mysteries covered this. I know Drew's talked about that before, but yeah, you didn't do that at all. I think you didn't even get into it until like chapter 6, right? So
pretty further on.
Yeah, which was a great way to do it, I thought. I mean, and quite frankly, the background of this guy, Drew's suspect, I think he briefly mentioned it to us and my audience last time on his interview. But this guy has the most, you could not make this up. Like, literally, if you wrote fiction, it would probably not be as extreme as this. This guy, and I could totally see where Drew is going with this. It is a lot of circumstantial evidence, but this guy is the most qualified parachutist that I've ever heard of. Some of this stuff that you covered of MACV-SOG, I didn't even know about this. I knew a lot about Richard Marcinko and the Navy SEALs, the Rogue Warrior autobiography, and what they were doing in Vietnam. So I knew a lot about Vietnam Black Ops, but this MACV-SOG thing was a whole nother universe to me, and it was absolutely ridiculous, the things that they were covering. So it's should be a good one. Drew's going to actually get a chance to talk this time, which is going to make it different from last interview. Some of the Drew fans weren't too pleased with my performance, so we'll get that. I don't think when Drew got the email, he thought he was going on Wolf Blitzer, guys, but it is what it is. I've gotten
You're
better.
The wolf.
So.
You're the wolf, man. You and I done a lot of back and forth.
For sure. Of the dark true crime world. Yeah, absolutely.
We Facebook all the time and do shows together all the time.
Oh yeah, no. And, that being said, head on over to Drew's DrewTube. The topics he's been doing lately have been awesome. Missing persons. I mean, what haven't you been doing lately? This guy's putting me out of business, man. I thought I was doing the lives, but now Drew's over there live every night doing UFOs, missing persons. I'm sure you're about to get into Yuba County 5 tomorrow, starting next month. So maybe
big time month.
Do a little shout out for that at the end, because Drew put me onto that case as well. But this is all about DB Cooper. I want to cover Dan Cooper because there's nothing on YouTube. You can't find anything about this really anywhere except for the few documentaries that we missed. There's not much, and then I assume there's even less about Braden. So I don't know how you came up with content.
That book. That's the only thing about Braden, which is shocking to me. because this guy is a badass from the word jump, and nobody comes close. Nobody.
Literally.
Rambo was based on Audie Murphy. Audie Murphy was great, patriotic badass, and then they based Rambo off of him, obviously in a Vietnam Special Forces setting. But a real Rambo is Ted B. Braden. This guy was out there. I mean, even other elite Special Forces guys were like, this dude's different even than us. He's in his own league.
Absolutely. No. So yeah, we'll definitely. I got some questions. We'll just get what Drew thinks, and hopefully work our way up to the skyjacking. So I guess if you guys have never heard of the case, very briefly, 1971 Thanksgiving Eve, a well-dressed man who's a swarthy-looking individual comes on with the tie and the sunglasses. He essentially hands a letter to the stewardess, and then pretty much things go downfold from there, but he ultimately has a briefcase bomb, and he gets the 200 cash that he skydives with, and he's never ever seen again. And there's just people like to go down the rabbit holes of his shoes and why he. The big thing about me is like nothing except for that sign from the lowered stairs, right? And that
placard.
The only
the placard, and they're not even sure that placard came from that flight.
Exactly. So other than that, there's there's a sighting that someone thought they saw something floating in the lake, which people thought might be part of the shoots or whatever. That was really never confirmed. And we'll later on we'll get to the money that's found later on on the river. But yeah, the guy just disappears into thin air, and it's just completely nuts. I think this would just be as big as Zodiac in my mind. I guess this is more of a one-off, but it's absolutely nuts. So we'll start with Drew's guy. Ted B. Braden, he signs up for the military underage, age 16, and he's sent to WW2, the Battle of the Bulge.
Yep, 16 years old, signed up to fight in World War II. Had his aunt there with him to help him sign, lied about his age, of course. Becomes a member of the 101st Airborne Screaming Eagles, Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and ship off the young man at 16 years old. Winds up paratrooping seeing combat at age 16 during World War II as a paratrooper. So saw combat early and kind of just stuck in his blood. He found out what he was good at, and that was jumping out of an airplane and anything involving combat. He was good at, but he heavily excelled at jumping out of airplanes. Like you can see behind me, that's Ted Braden getting a trophy for one of the multitude of skydiving events he would win as a member of the Golden Arrows Army jumping team. It was a sport parachute team called the Golden Arrows that competed around mostly Europe, and he won most of those competitions. He was just that good at skydiving.
Yeah, no, that was incredible. I saw that you covered that material in the book. And once again, guys, go get the Paratrooper of Fortune over on Amazon. Is it what's the website, Drew? Is it drewbeatsonbooks.com?
Correct.
Yeah, head over those, pick up this one, guys. If you're a DB Cooper guy, if you're even and again, one point that I want to make before we get into this whole Dan Cooper vortex rabbit hole is this book is incredible. Flight 305 aside, whether it looks like it's Braden, but whether he is or isn't, it's just an extremely entertaining story. And that's exactly what I was telling Drew, but behind the scenes, I like sighting in on the Zodiac Killer a lot. It's amazing, but I think you found as much as you could on Cheney, even though you found a bit more after the fact. But like this, even before you get to chapter 6, this is already ridiculous. You've already been through, World War II, Vietnam, Black Ops in Laos, and then later on the Stockade Blues, and like this guy's life is just the up and down roller coaster of this guy.
It's insane. It's a movie that you couldn't even come up with. I mean, exactly. Fiction can't rival what happened in this guy's life. Even outside of 305, what we know about him, what we can prove about him is mind blowing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's utterly incredible. So were you able to when you were doing your research, did you come up with anything else on the battle, what was going on with the Screaming Eagles, as far as like the combat he saw at a young age when he got out there? Was there any specific standout things that may have happened?
No, there's not a whole lot of detail about the exact combat. He definitely was in combat at 16. He came back home on a ship.
Mm-hmm.
And he's on a manifest and things like that. And then he goes, makes his way home to Toledo, Ohio, where he's from, and he's goes to college for about 3 years, and then he's pretty much in and out of the military for the rest of his well, not for the rest of his life, but at least the next 25 years, in and out. He joins the Air Force for a while. He's a parachuting instructor at Fort Benning, Georgia, for a long time. And then he, obviously makes his way over to Vietnam in 1965 as a member of MACV-SOG Black Ops in Vietnam. The most, interesting thing about World War II is he had experiences from that, and he meets a guy named General John Seelob in the early 60s at a parachute club in Germany, and they have World War II they had that in common, and they like to talk about World War II type stories. And actually, John Seelob passed away just 2 days ago. I think he was 101 years old. I mean, this guy was just a tough, badass of a guy himself. And he was actually chief of SOG when Braden was in SOG for about one of the years that Braden was in SOG, which was a little under 20 months. And those guys had a long time relationship, starting from sharing experiences in World War II. I don't think they knew each other during World War II, but it's something they had in common and forged a friendship over.
Absolutely. I actually caught your last stream. I saw that announcement. Rest in peace to the general. I mean, the stuff in here that you have about Seelob and Tyre, it's just every single person you talk to with these Braden stories is just like ridiculously entertaining, and it's just quite impressive isn't in the words. It's quite astounding. If this wasn't a nonfiction book, like we said, you know what I mean. But so I guess walk us through a little bit of MACV-SOG, just what their function was, and these missions that Braden gets involved in, just for anyone who might not know.
Yeah, the whole concept of SOG came from John F. Kennedy. President John F. Kennedy wanted a secret covert unit in Vietnam to kind of level the playing field. And these guys were going to be the most covert, clandestine army of all time. And when you signed up to be a member of this, they told you can't tell anybody what we do. You can't tell your wife, girlfriend. For 25 years, they put a number on it. And they said that what happens here stays here. And mainly that's because they were going into places like Laos, which were illegal because of the Geneva Convention. So these guys would go what they called across the fence into Laos. That's what it meant to go into Laos. They called it across the fence, and you were totally sterile. These guys would go over there with no dog tags, no identification, nothing that would say who they were or even American, because you weren't. If you got caught over there, forget it. If you were going to be what they called a positive capture, you don't know anything. They just let them torture you to death or kill you. They cannot. You have to give the government plausible deniability, as they called it. So these guys knew going in they were going to have it was going to be pretty rough. They said when you join MACV-SOG, you would either get be given either a Purple Heart or a body bag, because it was 100% casualty rate when you joined MACV-SOG. But of course, these guys heard about it, and they, the real badass of Special Forces said, "Man, that's for me, no matter what." And they would literally take you into a room, and someone like a colonel would get up in front of the whole group and be puffing on a pipe or something, and he'd pull back this curtain over this huge map of Vietnam and everything surrounding it, and he'd say, "Gentlemen, this is your area of operations. I mean, it's everywhere, no holds barred. Anything goes." So the whole creation of MACV-SOG was to just have an elite, covert, secret unit to slow down the unfettered use of the Ho Chi Minh Trail by the North Vietnamese. So those guys were taxed with prisoner snatches. If they got some of our guys, they would go in there in small teams to try to get our prisoners out. Weapon sabotage. They would find caches of weapons, and they would put dummy ammo in it that would cause the weapon to blow up. Like if you had an AK-47 or something and you shot that sabotage ammo, it literally blow up in your face. Stuff like that. Wiretapping was a big thing that the SOGs did. They would go over into Laos and find the North Vietnamese wiretap intervals, and they had devices that could go up there that they connect to a pole or wherever these were, and they could intercept messages, coded messages from the North Vietnamese to their different troops in the field. And it was actually Ted B. Braden's team. It was called Team Colorado. They were the first team to do a successful wiretap in Laos and got critical information where a general was going to be, and just really important stuff. So Team Colorado was the first team to establish that. It was an early SOG team. And the SOG teams, first of all, it stands for It's called MACV-SOG, which is Military Assistance Command Vietnam Studies and Observations Group. And that sounds really benign, of course, and they wanted it to be. But these were the killer guys. I mean, this was the Black Ops. Like I just said, all the stuff they did, the Black Ops unit, they wanted it to sound benign if anyone heard it. But no, these guys were the absolute top echelon of special forces over in Vietnam. And they consisted of what I just call a team, and they were named after usually states. There was like it would be called RT for recon team, or ST for strike team, but usually RT for recon team. And Braden was on Colorado, but they were made up of 3 Americans usually. And the team leader was called the 1-0, and that's what Ted Braden was. He was the team leader of Team Colorado. So you had number 2 guy was the assistant team leader. He was called the 1-1, and then the 1-2 would be like a radio guy. And the balance of the team would be 3 or 4 what they called indigenous troops to the area. And usually the MACV-SOGs used what they call mountain yards, which were an ethnic tribe in the area that they trained themselves, special forces trained. And these guys were as good as anybody, just tough as they could be. Smaller guys, but just really tough, really brave, and they worked well. So we're talking about 7-man teams going across the fence into Laos. As soon as they were dropped on the ground, they were being hunted because those guys knew they were coming, and they knew they were over there. They were tipped off a lot about, there was some kind of leaking going on during a lot of this, and they would be given information to where a team might land. So as soon as these guys, the helicopter leaves them, you got 7 guys on the ground. The air's, your whatever dropped you off, airplane, helicopter's gone, and you're on your own. Those guys would find them, and they're being hunted immediately to kill them all. So this was tough stuff. I mean, parachuting at night, really, really crazy, hair-raising stuff. And even among the MACV-SOGs, Ted Braden stood out. I mean, it's just somebody that took a lot of unnecessary risk. Like his assistant team leader, a guy named Jim Hetrick, told me they had the first night vision scope in Vietnam. It was called a Starlight, and it was like the very first, like a prototype, like kind of like CIA stuff back then. And Ted Braden was given that is a SOG team leader, the first one that had it, and it wasn't working correctly one time when they were in Laos, and he literally smashed it on an open trail. He got so frustrated with it, which is a big no-no because the NVA will see that and say, oh, this team, obviously Americans have just been here and then we're going to track them. Yeah. But he took no care for things like that. But he always got his guys out. Like I said, he did the first successful wiretap. He never managed to get killed or any of the guys under him. He was just that good. He just had this penchant for survival, but it was coupled with a secret death wish. And that's what was said of him by a special forces guy named Donald Duncan that would later, do an article with him in Ramparts magazine, which I talk about quite a bit. So, that's basically MACV-SOG. I mean, the top of the heap, toughest there is, hair raising every time you go over that, you go over into Laos, you're kind of on your own, and all hell breaks loose basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, a lot of it was very reminiscent to the SEAL Team 6 and the Marcinko Rogue Warrior stuff, because it, them operating out of uniform, and the unless otherwise authorized, like Marcinko used to put out the radio like, hey, we're going out there, and he wouldn't even wait for them to confirm. He would just bring his guys to the field and then just like, we'll deal with the the bureaucrats when we get back type thing.
Oh yeah, there was a lot. Yeah, they were off. They didn't have a lot of oversight. These very similar to them. They didn't have much oversight at all. That's why. Even a group, even not just special forces, but SOG, you had a lot of latitude, especially as a team lead. You could get away with anything, really.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, what you came up with the wiretapping was absolutely astounding, because I didn't know anything about that. I mean, it's obviously a thing. I knew more about like the Windwalkers, but that was like World War II, right? So this stuff of them going into unauthorized territory and wiretapping, I was like, oh my god, this is nuts. You know what I mean? Like, trying to even think of doing that, you know what I mean, is absolutely ridiculous. And then as far as Braden being the 0-1, and I remembered him losing his mind and smashing the thing, but I didn't even know it was the prototype.
It was a prototype, of night vision.
Crazy. That's wild. So at one point, does he gets into it with a Vietnamese ally officer, and he kind of ragdolls that guy around a bit in front of some other guys.
Yeah, I think I know the one you're talking about where that guy was going to be in charge of the team for the day. It was an indigenous guy, and Braden wasn't happy with that announcement.
Yeah.
So he literally went and grabbed the dude and threw him on the ground, and the guy almost cried, because Braden did have fits of anger like that, because he thought, they were kind of combining a team or something, and he wasn't good with that. He's like, wait a minute, this little guy isn't gonna be telling me what to do, out on there and have life or death judgment over me. So Braden literally threw that guy on the ground and he cried. So I think Braden kind of got his way again on that deal. He, he had a lot of friends over there, that friends in high places that would take care of him. But at the same time, they knew he was doing a lot of things that they didn't like. He was a rogue. He killed a friendly fighter over there, a South Vietnamese soldier that was on our side. They found him face down in a ditch with a bullet hole in the back of his head, and they don't know what transpired. They just know that him and Braden had a little discussion about something, and the guy wound up face down in a rice paddy with a bullet hole in the back of his head. Because they had an argument, basically. Of course, the other guys told on him, on his team, and they pretty much just brushed it right under the rug. They didn't want that getting out. This doesn't look good. You basically murdered the guy and brushed it under the rug.
I was hoping you would tell that one, because I know that was like was that the same thing where some fire came in and he basically like charged at it by himself?
Yes, he charged at the fire. Yeah, and I got that's not even in the book. I've got that recently from an old magazine, from a guy that contacted me that was actually writing about his Congo unit, 5 Commando. And then he sent me a copy of his article that he wrote about Braden's team, and I couldn't read it. It was just he couldn't scan it or whatever. So I wound up getting the actual magazine that was fairly old. I think the year 2000, not real old, but old enough. And it had a real detailed account of that incident where they heard some gunfire off in a village, and Braden literally ran towards the fire. This guy loved high adrenaline, high action. And at some point, that's when he encountered this friendly South Vietnamese fighter. Maybe the guy was turned or whatever. They don't know. They never said. But when the other guys came up behind Braden, they saw the guy face down in a rice paddy with a bullet hole in the back of his head, and they knew something didn't go well with that guy. And not a word was spoken to Braden about it. Like, hey, what happened to him? Don't even ask him. Don't even ask him. It wasn't that guy's day.
I was wondering about that. It's very Full Metal Jacket, you know what I mean, with just the complete chaos, you know what I mean, and the blending
total chaos. The haze, the fog of war.
Exactly. I just want to shout out a quick comment from Mr. JSV650. After I learned about MACV, the jump DB did would have been like making a sandwich for those guys.
He was overqualified for the Cooper jump. That's some things people would try to use against him. He's overqualified.
That's I love how the FBI approaches it, where it was this complete amateur that had no idea what he was doing, and he just slipped off the stairs and splattered the second they left. It's like, well, if you did find anything, you never told us, because there's nothing ever came up, and there's 2 jets right behind it. So
they tried to paint that narrative for years, and it finally fell apart. Like a guy like Mark Metzler, if you know who that is, a really accomplished skydiver, and he's a big DB Cooper follower, and he destroyed that thing about Cooper being a novice parachutist. I mean, he destroyed that. He said he absolutely picked the right parachute for coming out of a 727 in the wind drag. And it was 200 miles an hour at wind speed. I mean, it would have killed a sport parachute. It would have just torn a thing right apart. He said he absolutely picked the right parachute. Tina Mucklow, that was on there, that spent the most time with Cooper, said that he put on the parachute rig with no issue at all, just like he'd done it a million times. And she even offered him the instructions for the parachute rig, and he said, "I won't be needing those." I mean, he was clear. He was he'd done it a few times.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, some of those suspects I think you previously mentioned have like 0 jumps or barely any, basic training wasn't enough. So
or some have none that you can prove. There's a suspect named Dwayne Weber. This guy's terrible. And I don't think there's no proof he ever did a static line or a free fall in his life. And he's this top tier suspect. So that's just the goofiness of DB Cooper, we'll call it.
Yeah, absolutely. The whole Halo high altitude craziness. You know, what I mean, I really think that again, you know, I think we spoke about it last time, but I really think that they would have to have some jumping experience. I wouldn't be able to take
to come out of a 727. And what I understand, and I'm not a skydiver, I've never even done a tandem, but from what I understand, for even experienced skydivers, the first time you jump out of a jet like that with that kind of wind speed, it will get your attention quickly.
For sure.
But second or third time, if you're experienced, you get used to it pretty quick. But the first time is definitely eye-opening. It's deafeningly loud. And one thing is you're so much higher than a regular, propeller plane that you could land almost, so much further away than you anticipated is another thing to keep in mind.
And then, and Tyre told you that those military style chutes were steerable, and that, there was
for them.
Yeah, people tried to say like, oh no, you couldn't steer that at all. And I mean, if you're an expert,
Cooper took an unsteerable chute, a Navy backpack 8 with a C9 Navy conical canopy, and they said that just wasn't steerable at all. And Cooper didn't pick the sport parachute, the Pioneer model that you could steer. And Al Tyre said, man, we were used to pilot bailout rigs. You didn't have sport parachutes in the early 1960s. We could steer. He said we could steer a C9 all day long. I mean, like we could put that wherever you wanted it.
I absolutely believe that. So this guy has the most like back and forth military career that I've ever seen, because he goes to you're amazing at this timeline. So at what point does he break out that Ramparts article? That's between Vietnam and before he goes to the Congo unit.
It's after the Congo, because a lot of it is most of it is about the Congo.
Right.
That article. So that's he deserts Vietnam at the end of 1966. It's December 1966. He at some point he winds up in a bar in Saigon, which he was seen there a lot with the guys wearing suits, and the CIA types, as they would call it, CIA operators and guys like that. Which he had a lot of contact with over there. Worked the black market constantly in Vietnam, and he told his other guys on his team, he said, if you ever see me over there, you don't know me. Don't even come up to me, kind of thing, because I'm doing business. You don't know me. I could have told these guys I'm anybody, so don't even walk up to me. And that was what it was said. But he's in a bar in Saigon, and he's not happy with what he's so good at being a soldier. He's a sergeant first class, but he's not making enough money. Ted Braden, it's all about money. And he's not in the military for patriotism, and he's blunt about that. He's there because he's good at it, and he's trying to make money. That's all he cares about, is money. So that's a good foreshadowing for what was going to happen in 1971, right? Absolutely. So he hears in that bar that they're making good money. Mercenaries are making really good money to fight in the Congo, wars. And he says, oh, that sounds good to me. I'm just going to take up on my own liberty and just leave Vietnam. I'm not going to tell anybody. I'm still an active combatant, and I'm just going to leave. I mean, he doesn't tell anyone.
He's like a captain of his own unit. It's not like he's like a private or something.
Right. So he just takes off. But he's still a member of the United States Army in an active war. And he just decides to leave. I mean, you can't make this shit up, right? But that's what he does. So he leaves in December of 66. He's been over there. He's done like 19 months straight in the field, which is insane. That's an endurance record. I mean, heavy combat, straight in a row. So he's probably already got some form of PTSD, but he's like, oh, I can make good money over there. So he just decides to leave. He finds his way back to America. He spends the holidays and I think in Miami or something. And then some point in early January of 67, he goes over to England, and he's got some intel on where to sign up to fight in these commando units in the Congo as a mercenary. And he finds his way to Belgium, which is interesting because that's where Dan Cooper comics come from. So who knows? So he's over there at a hotel, and he's talking to this guy. Hey, I heard you're the recruiter for 5 Commando or something like that, and the guy's not there, and then he comes back, kind of a weird, funny story. But he winds up joining 5 Commando and makes his way down to the Congo to fight as a mercenary, and he goes under there under an alias, a Canadian alias, a guy that got killed over in Vietnam. So he's using this guy's name, and it's just funny. It's a Canadian guy. So he doesn't sign up to fight as Ted B. Braden. He uses this other guy named Edward Joseph Horner. And so he signs up in 5 Commando, and they could tell just by interviewing him and stuff that this guy knows what he's doing. He's like expert at infiltration, sabotage, any weapon you can name, just covert, whatever. I mean, they quickly figure out this guy knows his shit, and he's going to get some kind of leadership position in the commando unit. But before everything starts rolling, his commanding officer over there, a guy named Colonel Ralph Peters, and this was Mad Mike Hoare's unit, by the way, before, and I think Hoare was out of the picture at the time, and a guy took over named Colonel Ralph Peters, and Peters called him to a meeting at a hotel, said, hey, well, I got to meet with you about something, and he's like, yeah, no problem. He goes and meets Peters, and they walk down the end of this hallway, and it's kind of dimly lit, and all of a sudden he said, turn around, and there's 5 guns pointed at Ted Braden's head. And they said, are you Ted B. Braden? And he's like, yeah. Since you got 5 pistols pointed at my head, I guess I am. And they were like, you're wanted for desertion from Vietnam. And it was the CIA tracked him down. I mean, they found Peters. Yeah. They found out he was down there somehow. I mean, they know everything going on. They know where he is. And they interrogate him for 2 or 3 days. And, strip his clothes down, blah, blah, blah. And then they, ask him all these questions and all that. Finally, they whisked him away to a private airport and fly him back to Fort Dix, New Jersey, where, he's confined in the brig. And that's where he meets a guy named Colonel Hank Birch, who I met and who's told his story, which is just, his story on its own is just mind blowing. Mm-hmm. So he's in charge of Ted Braden in confinement at Fort Dix, New Jersey. And this is, this is 1967, before the Ramparts article. This is probably somewhere around March 67, I think. And he immediately gets on Hank Birch's map because he's like, sees Braden in his cell, and he's got a TV set in Fort Dix in a military jail. This dude's got a TV in his cell. You can't make that up. He's like, how does this guy get a TV?
It was a whole bunch of stuff, right? Smoking,
a whole bunch of stuff. He had
smoking, and then what? Cigars with laces.
Cigars. Cigars with filters, which was a big no-no. You couldn't even have a cigarette with a filter because they'd stop up the toilets with them. The prisoners would. But he had cigars. I mean, I think they were Havana tip, whatever they called those. And he had all that kind of stuff, and Hank looked at him, and Braden stood eye to eye with Hank, and he said, don't worry, sir, this is all going to work out. And he just had this confidence about him. So it comes the day for Braden's court-martial. Remember, this guy deserted Vietnam. He's up for desertion. Forget about the Congo. They got him for desertion. He just left the battlefield.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is a big deal. So it was coming up on his day for his court-martial. And a phone call comes in from a guy named Harold K. Johnson, and he's the chief of staff of the entire United States Army. Yep. Only person above this guy is the president of the United States. And he says, we're not going to have that court-martial today for Ted Braden. And they were like, well, we need to know why. And they said, there's not enough MPs on base to secure the courtroom. And Hank's like, are you kidding me? This is Fort Dix, New Jersey. He just looked out the window, and there's like an army of MPs. It was some contrived BS, right? And somebody's protecting Ted Braden.
Oh, yeah.
So they basically offer Braden, since they're not going to court-martial him, they got to do something with him, right? Yeah. So they give him a general discharge. And they said, look, we're going to give you a general discharge. You're not going to do any more prison time. And but you got to just promise us one thing, Ted. He goes, you cannot ever join the U.S. military ever in your life or any shape, way, or form. This is the deal we're giving you, and it's a good deal. You're deserted. You could spend another 30 years in Leavenworth, dude. But we're going to give you a general. And just let you go. Is that fine with you? And he balks at it. He doesn't want this deal. He said he wants his wristwatch back. And they're like, are you crazy? He goes, you took my wristwatch when you apprehended me in the Congo. I want my watch back. And they're like, I don't, they couldn't find it. But he balked at that deal, which is insanity. And, so he begrudgingly, he can't get his watch back. So he begrudgingly takes the general discharge. And that's the end of his military career right there, as far as we know. I mean, he may have done some covert work for the CIA later as a CIA, a contractor, but we don't know. It's all kind of speculation. But so that ends his military career right there. And then a few months later, he winds up being interviewed for Ramparts.
Yeah. No, I mean, so I love that scene when they in the book when they pick him up in the Congo, like they find like, hey, are you Braden? Blah blah blah. That's absolutely nuts. So like, did you learn anything else about that Congo conflict down there? Was there a lot of other mercenaries, and he he basically just heard about that in Saigon from like
he heard people talking about it in Saigon, and that's what prompted him to go over there just to make more money. Like he says it in Ramparts. He goes, I wasn't there for glory, I was there for the money. And he makes no bones about it. Like I'm Uncle Sam taught me how to be this good soldier, this incredible skydiver. And he did the Ramparts article under the guise of a wanted ad. He's looking for work as a mercenary, and it's really a real ad that he put out in the San Francisco Chronicles saying ex Special Forces, World War II veteran, 101st Airborne, experience with demolition, sabotage, infiltration, running hunter killer teams. I mean, this amazing, mind-blowing resume. It said master parachutist with 895 logged free falls. 895 logged free falls. That's stunning. Back in that time, before sport parachuting was popular, that just started catching on in the early 70s. We're talking 1967. He's at 895 logged free falls. This dude's a badass. He's a Halo pioneer. He went over to Vietnam as teaching Halo for Project Delta because he was so good at it. And one of the things he loved to do was pulling the ripcord under 1,000 feet, which is crazy. But he liked doing that. And there's no rules in Vietnam, so he liked it.
Yeah, exactly. The Halo thing was like, the way they were doing it, at least the way you described it, that he was doing it, he's waiting to like the last second possible and going as low as he can, which I can understand from, the Black Ops and operating in, in I guess unauthorized territory or whatever. But even still, what I mean? There's no way you can describe that and not have it sound crazy.
Oh yeah, adrenaline. I mean, it's just a total adrenaline junkie. I mean, secret death wish.
Yeah, that's crazy. So the Stockade Blue, the Stockade Blues chapter was nuts. Because he gets called in there, and then it's like, and the way he gets let off, it's like, one thing I wanted to ask you was, you talked to this other one of these other people you interviewed, and said that like he saw Braden working in Nam, but it didn't match the timeline. I'm just wondering,
that was Hank Birch, which is the one that oversaw him at Fort Dix. He was a captain at the time. He was overseeing Braden in a regular army. And then at some point in his career, he's a member of the National Guard, and he becomes a lieutenant colonel in the National Guard. And he's in Fort Jackson, South Carolina. And he's talking to another lieutenant colonel. I think he might have still been regular army then, but he's retired as a National Guard. But he became a lieutenant colonel before that. And he's talking to another lieutenant colonel at Fort Jackson, and somehow Braden's name comes up, or something that made him think of Ted Braden. And he said, "Are you talking about Ted Braden? Because I knew this guy. I oversaw him at Fort Dix." And the guy said, "Well, I saw him over in Vietnam in 1973." And Hank's thinking, "No, that can't be, because Al Tyre said he ran into Braden at a truck stop in 73." And I can't remember where, but Bowling Green, Kentucky. And so Hank knew there was something weird going on. Like, he couldn't have been in both places. Even Braden couldn't pull that off. So he was left confused by the conversation, because the guy said, "Oh, that whole deal about the Congo was a ruse." He said that was just a setup to protect Braden. He was just doing CIA work over there, and that was all staged. And what you probably saw at Fort Dix was staged. But no, he's back over. He was back over in Vietnam in the early 70s doing stuff, for the CIA. So yeah, he's okay. That's the Braden story. But Hank knew that wasn't true, because Al distinctively remembered running into Braden at a truck stop in Bowling Green, Kentucky in 73. And that's when the other lieutenant colonel said he saw him. So he couldn't have been in two places at once. So to this day, Hank does not know why the guy told him that. It was almost like he wanted him to believe something untrue about Braden. It's really strange. And that's what you run into when you research this guy. It's all kind of, look over here, look over there. No.
Yeah. I wanted to get your thoughts on that, because I just wondered if there was any possibility that maybe it could have been like a little bit off, and maybe he could have been out there doing something but came back. That's just what I thought of reading it. But sounds like you have a better grasp of.
It's plausible. It's plausible he might have done some CIA contract work. The last guy I ran into on Facebook said, because I'm in a lot of the MACV-SOG groups and stuff, and a lot of these guys, they weren't SOG, some were just special forces or CIA contractors. And this one guy was, early special forces, but he did a lot of CIA contract work doing radios and stuff. And he said he ran into a guy that looked like Braden in El Salvador in 1985, and it was kind of a wink, wink. That's how these guys talk, and seemed to have a little bit of knowledge about when Braden left the Congo and stuff like that. So of course I followed up with the guy as much as and tried to squeeze him as hard as I could. Of course, he was slow to respond and he wasn't as talkative now that I was asking specifics. And, the record shows that Braden was in Loretto federal prison in Pennsylvania in that same year. So the CIA would have had to have gotten him out and went and did some work for him and then brought him back for a little while. He wasn't in Loretto that long. Another one of these get out of jail free cards, but he did get sentenced to Loretto federal penitentiary, and we don't even know exactly for what crime. You cannot find out. It's buried, and such as anything with Braden. It's extremely hard to come by any official records of him.
Yeah, I've seen you cover some of that stuff, and it's baffling, like everything else with this case. I mean, there's just like the Fort Dix thing, for example, like you said, like, if it's going to be staged, why send him to Fort Dix then with all these high-ranking officers around and stuff? You could have did that at a little teeny tiny, military jail that with not many witnesses.
Yeah, way out. Yeah, they had it's like the military. You could have,
you
could find an old shack in Arkansas or whatever. I mean, So why do it? Yeah, why have it? And why have a guy like Harold K. Johnson intervene on your behalf? I mean, that guy was at the top of the food chain, and he's calling to intervene for a deserter. That's never happened in the history of the U.S. military, where a guy deserts an active war and gets a general discharge, and the dude balks at it for a wristwatch. That's stranger than fiction, but so true.
Yes, every single detail like that, with just like his personality shown through with the wristwatch. I'm like, this guy's amazing. He has no limit. He just
none.
He'll face any consequence and just not care. You know what I mean? So we have Tyre and the golden arrows here, where you're talking about Singlob. I guess that must be where they
that's where they became buddies. And, in the parachute club for the golden arrows. And Wiesbaden, Germany in the early 60s. And Al was a fly on the wall. He was just a young guy at the time. Braden was a little older. Of course, Singlaw was older, and Singlaw was in the OSS. Of course, that was a predecessor to the CIA. And this guy, was a total badass of warfare. And Al Tyre was kind of the guinea pig of how to do a free fall out of a plane with all that equipment on. It hadn't been done before. Like, let's see what that'll be like. And Al was the volunteer guinea pig, and Braden would jump alongside him to keep Al from spinning out with all of that equipment, rifle, backpack, heavy loads. That's what those guys were pioneering in the early 60s. With Vietnam coming up.
Yeah, no, that was a great chapter too. Basically the award jumping, and they were basically winning every competition with the comp jumping and stuff like that. Tyre's accounts were really awesome. He brought some amazing stuff.
Yeah, like the truck story is the best with Al.
Yeah,
unfortunately, he had a stroke not too long ago, because we did a podcast, with Chris, and Hank told his story, which is great because it's recorded. But so unfortunately, I have all the emails, and of course, Al's story is preserved in the book and other places. But I really wanted him to be recorded, telling
it on audio. Yeah.
And I hope he recovers and we can ever get that, because he tells the story about seeing Braden in Bowling Green, Kentucky is so great, because those guys caught up. And Braden's driving a truck at the time. He's driving for Pittsburgh Plate Glass, and he shows Al his rig. They had lunch together at the truck stop, because it was just a chance encounter. And so they walk over there. Braden showing them the cab of the truck, and they're just talking in the cab of Braden's cab. And Braden asked Al Tyre, he said, "Well, what did you think of that whole DB Cooper thing?" Because this is only maybe a year and a half or so after the Cooper incident, when they're having this conversation, and Al was like, "Oh yeah, I heard about that, but I didn't think much of it." And he said Braden was dejected. Like, "What? You're a skydiver, Al. You're like, you're a sport parachutist.
One of the pioneers.
Yeah, he's a pioneer too. I mean, Altair was one of the best jumpers ever too.
Yep.
And he was and he said Braden was just dejected that he didn't jump all over this DB Cooper thing. And he's like, what? He goes, this guy jumped out of the plane with the money, and that, you know, you didn't really care much about that. And he just said Braden was kind of dejected. And then they just went on to another topic, and it didn't hit Altair till 25 years later, and he's at another jumping club somewhere, I think in Oklahoma, and he's reading Parachutist magazine, and they had the DB Cooper composite, and it hit him right then and there. That's Ted. That's Ted Braden. He was trying to tell me it was him. You know, and to this day, Altair fully believes that Ted Braden was DB Cooper, fully. And this is an experienced, hardcore skydiver himself, fully believes it was Braden.
Yeah, that's my biggest issue, is all of these well qualified people, and then me sitting with my opinion on the internet. It's very, very difficult to go against that. Well, it was interesting you mentioned that Ramparts was the SF Chronicle, right? Because is this the part where I should interject that the Zodiac killer is DB Cooper? Because you know that they like to combine the Zodiac with literally every crime on the internet. So
and Frank Morris. I think it was David Gold.
Yeah, there's
anyway. Frank Morris, DB Cooper. He killed John Bonet.
Yeah, nothing drives me more crazy when they're just like, they include all together single thing ever for the Zodiac, and then I'm like, DB Cooper, two completely different composites. Like,
some guy really tried to push me on that once. Was like, how can you prove he wasn't? How can you prove that DB Cooper wasn't Zodiac? And you can't go, well, the Zodiac was stocky. Nobody said Cooper was. I mean, who knows? It's just like, they want to believe it, but
swarthy. I know it's anyway. They do that way too much. I'm not a fan of it. But Drew has two great suspects, so you can check out Sighting In on the Zodiac Killer as well as Paratrooper of Fortune. Well, I suppose we can get into Flight 305. I believe it's November 24th. 1971, where a swarthy man, possibly the man that we've been discussing. Oh yeah, if there's any questions for Drew on Ted B. Braden, DB Cooper, or anything else that he's been covering a lot of, feel free to drop them in the chat, guys. The big moment, DB Cooper. I like to call it Dan Cooper, because obviously the news messed this up when they reported it with the epic DB Cooper moniker. I at least know that much, albeit
that's
not
important.
Much.
That's important.
It is to me, because I don't like how they keep repeating you know what I mean, the right thing. Also, it was interesting you mentioned him using the Canadian soldier's alias, because if I'm not mistaken, how you mentioned Belgium, the Dan Cooper comics were big in Canada as well, weren't they? So
Dan Cooper's a comic book, and it portrayed a pilot in the Royal Canadian Air Force. So the Dan Cooper was it's fictional, but it was a Canadian.
Right. So I'm wondering if him using that Canadian soldier's moniker is some sort of a hint to the Dan Cooper.
Could be. He used Ted Braden. It is proven used an alias of a Canadian. Well, it was a real Canadian. Who got killed in a premature mortar explosion over in Vietnam that he knew about. So it was an easy name to use because the guy was already dead. But he was a Canadian citizen. He moved to North Carolina, but yeah, he was a Canadian citizen, Canadian born.
Yeah, that's just what I thought of when you mentioned it. It was like the Dan Cooper being the royal soldier. General question: did you ever find anything on any relation to Braden and comic books when you across your research? I know he was a pretty busy guy, so
I didn't. It's fun to speculate about the Dan Cooper comic and if that's what influenced DB Cooper, or Dan Cooper to pick that name. What could it have been, the comic book? And then people are kind of split, but it's a fun thing to speculate on. It's a Franco-Belgian comic, so it's from Belgium, made in Belgium. It's written in French, so there was some in French-speaking Canada. I think they kind of overblow how available the comic book was in Canada. It's far more readily available in Belgium. And Ted Braden was all over Belgium in the Golden Arrows, number one. And that comic book, I think, started in the 50s. So when Braden's in Belgium, the comic book's already in Belgium, and Braden did several jumps in Belgium. Of course, they were stationed out of Germany. So it's easy to get to all these places. They would drive to Paris in Braden's Mercedes, him and Al, another teammate or whatever. And then, of course, Braden fought in the Congo with mostly Belgians. He signed up in Belgium and Brussels. So he spent, a fairly good amount of time in Belgium.
Definitely.
At different points. So he could have run into it there, or, it's just speculation, but it's a fun one.
Yeah. I like to speculate on that one. Me personally, I seemed like it seems convincing. You know what I mean? Not that I have overwhelming research in either direction. So flight 305 comes across. I hope you guys saw this on Unsolved Mysteries because it's epic, or just anything else that you may have seen on this DB Cooper skyjacking. But it's just, I mean, it's just so wild to me that this guy comes up with a fake ticket. Dan Cooper gets in there, sits down. Was it Mucklow that he passed the note to? And then
He passed the note to Florence Schaffner.
Yeah, so he passes this note to the flight attendants, and then she puts it in her pocket because she thought it was like another douche guy hitting on her. And he's like, "Ma'am, you better take a look at that." They take a look. It says like, "I have a bomb" or something like that.
Yeah, I have a bomb, and I want you to sit by me.
Yep. So
and then he showed it to her. He opened up the briefcase and showed her what looked like sticks of dynamite and wires, and it looked convincing to her.
Yeah, exactly. And this is the whole thing, guys. And don't do a Zodiac bus bomb diagram to me here, guys, because we're not doing that. It was probably a fake bomb.
We're pretty sure it probably wasn't real, but it probably looked good.
Yeah, it definitely. Like a guy smart enough to know what it looks like, and many years in World War II in Nam and Laos and Congo would certainly do that. So this is my whole thing is this guy's like demeanor, and this is why I didn't like any of the other suspects, and why I thought Drew laid out such a good case in his book. Is this guy's cool as a cucumber? He's not Richard McCoy sweating makeup in with a wig on in the freaking lavatory. He's drinking mixed drinks and smoking butts and just chilling for the whole time after he like makes this announcement. Like at no point
at all.
Yeah, at no point ever did he panic, and that's the most extreme thing about this to me. Really, it's just his demeanor throughout the whole event, like perfectly planned to a T. And that's if you guys haven't heard of this case, I advise that you look this up, because I would think there would be a lot more out there on this, and there just really isn't. But walk us through your thoughts on the jump. So he basically he brings the note. She sits down next to him. We get the good description from the college student that you've referenced many times of the turkey.
Bill Mitchell. Bill Mitchell. So he gives her gives Florence Schaffner the note. She finally reads it. Says, "Miss, I have a bomb. I want you to sit by me." So she looks at it and she takes down his demands, and he wrote some things down, and he asked for the notes back. Just so clean. I want the notes back. Not only the notes that he wrote, the notes that she took down. I mean, this guy is like not missing anything. And remember, Richard McCoy left his hijack instructions in the waiting area and boarded the plane, and they had to bring him on. This isn't the same guy, people. I mean, I took some shit for that because I know he's got some fans, but sorry, this guy was clean. This guy was smart as hell. It looked like it was, had a lot of pre-planning. So anyway, she goes up to the cockpit, Florence Schaffner does, and say, "Hey, this guy's hijacking the plane. Here's his demands. He wants $200,000 in cash. He wants 4 parachutes. He specified 2 front and 2 back, which are 2 different sets, because obviously the one in the front is your reserve chute. Your main one's the back chute. And then, mainly these kind of badass jumpers, they never really ever go for the reserve. That was just some stuff they gave him, but that was brilliant, because asking for 2 sets, they thought he was going to take a hostage with him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
it was brilliant. It was brilliant. The initial idea was brilliant. Using a briefcase bomb, that's a game changer. He didn't do something lame like McCoy with a dummy grenade and a pistol with a bullet out of it. I mean, he did a briefcase bomb. This is like, I mean, now it seems kind of funny. Like, yeah, sure, that's not real. But back then it was, because no one had thought of it before. They're like, dang, that looks good to me. And of course they decided, they called into Northwest Orient Airlines executives and stuff, and they said, "Yeah, dude, give him what he wants. Meet his demands." So when the plane landed in Seattle from Portland, that first of all, Cooper said, "Take the plane over here. Not in the main area. Take it further down, on the back part of the runway where we're away because of snipers and everything else." I mean, he was smart. Had her close all the shades over the windows. Very smart. with the refueling, the whole
He
thing.
got mad at how long it was taking.
Yeah, he was getting really agitated at how long it took him to refuel, but he didn't lose his cool either.
Yeah, he just
So
pressed him on it to
Tina
speed
Mucklow actually brings him the money and the parachutes,
Mhm.
and they brought it the money in a canvas bank bag and not a knapsack that he requested. So he's kind of pissed about that.
Yep.
But instead of him hawing about it, he took out a pocket knife and he starts cutting shroud lines off of one of the other parachutes to secure it.
Mhm.
So this guy was, he was a badass, but
He adapted to everything that he didn't plan for. Like,
the plane takes off. He gets his demands. Plane takes off. Not soon after it takes off, they felt a pressure bump, or what they thought was a pressure bump, which was him probably jumping out. But the important thing is it was a Boeing 727 with an aft stair, the stair in the middle of the body towards the back, where you could load the plane and unload the plane.
Yep.
Cooper knew the plane better than the pilots did. Cooper knew that the plane could take off with that stair down. It could take off off of the runway with that stair in the down position. And he argued for that. Why? Because he didn't want to have to worry about getting it down when he was going to jump out of that damn thing. And so they had an argument on the ground in Seattle. He was telling them, hey, I want this plane to take off with that stair down. And the pilots are like, are you out of your mind? It can't be done. We're not doing it. And Cooper relented, said, they weren't going to back off of that. So he relented and said, okay, go ahead and take off with the stair up. Of course, when it got in flight, he had Tina Mucklow actually help him, which says, he knew how to jump out of it, but was never the person that probably operated it. So he actually had her help to lower the stair in flight. And then he told her to go back up front to first class. And then, all the hostages got off, by the way, in Seattle. It was just, the flight crew left.
They had to slow the speed down, correct? Because they were having an issue, and he called up to the cockpit, and he's like, go
200 miles an hour,
and
wing flaps at 30 degrees. The altitude, he told him the altitude to fly at. He knew exactly how it needed to be to get out of it.
Exactly.
And he had it right, but he knew that plane could take off with that stare down, that was not common knowledge at the time.
Exactly.
Most people didn't, one, know you could jump it at all. Two, did not know you could take off with that stare down. So he had insider knowledge about that.
Absolutely. When he took the pocket knife and started cutting the ropes to readjust the knapsack, I'm like, this is like, I never heard of anything like this in my life.
That's a badass right there. He didn't even, he wasn't happy about it. He said, wait a minute, I told you I wanted a knapsack, and they bring it in literally a canvas bank bag where you can see the bills on top of it. It's like, oh, whatever. He just starts cutting up the shroud lines to the other parachute he wasn't going to use. I mean, this is a badass. This guy doesn't even, wasn't happy about it, but he improvised. Right there on the spot.
Absolutely.
I mean, this special forces all over it.
Yeah.
Talk about Bill Mitchell, the guy that sat by him. Well, Bill Mitchell, none of the passengers knew the plane was being hijacked. None.
Exactly.
Bill Mitchell didn't know, and he sat right across from Cooper. And Bill Mitchell, was jealous. Of course, Bill Mitchell was jealous because he's like, why are these cute flight attendants, stewardesses, stews they would call them back in the day, fawning over this old guy? Because Mitchell was 21 years old. A college guy. He was 6'2", pretty athletic at the time. And he's like, why are they fawning over this old guy? That's kind of where they start building the thing that Cooper was middle age. And they said he had and Bill Mitchell remembered that he had a turkey neck, this extra flap of skin under his neck, because he was just looking to pick him apart as a jealous guy. Like, he just remembered that feature about him. And he also remembered that Cooper spilled a drink while on board. So just honest remembrances from a guy that was on the flight that didn't know, he was relaxed because he didn't know it was being hijacked. He knew something was weird with them fawning over the guy, but he had no clue it was being hijacked, because that's how slick Cooper was. And so Mitchell told the FBI that after they interviewed him, after he got off in Seattle, then they found out, hey, the plane was being hijacked, because they knew something was up because it was taking so long to land. They just kept saying, oh, mechanical issues or a problem on the ground. And no one really freaked out. They were just all calm back then. And then they found out why it took so long to land when they got into the terminal. They said, hey, you're being hijacked by that guy from the back. And then they're like, oh, now it makes sense.
Yeah. That's man. There's so much. So there's a lot of conjecture of like his description, and then all those weird composites of which I think you outlined all the existing ones in the book. And then as far as his, can I get your thoughts on his footwear? Because they make this big deal about dress shoes. Like the second he stepped on the stairs, he slipped off and broke his neck because he wore loafers. You know what I mean? But then there's this whole thing that other descriptions, or he had more of those jump style boots that would be more of like a military style Braden boot. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean that it's all up for conjecture.
Yeah.
Tina Mucklow's the only one that gave any description at all about his footwear, and she'd be the most qualified too because she sat by him for the longest. Right. And she said pebble grain, and she did use the term ankle high. Mm-hmm. I don't consider a loafer ankle high.
No way.
Ankle high is kind of like a dingo boot or something. She absolutely in the FBI file uses the words ankle high. So it's not just what you think of as just a regular little bitty slip-on loafer, because that would be in total insanity to jump out in the Pacific Northwest. I mean, of course, if you were wearing loafers, it's going to blow off as soon as you get out of that app stair. Exactly. And you're going to be barefooted in the middle of the, you're going to be marching out of those woods barefoot
in a storm.
So I think there was more. I just think there was more going on with the footwear. That's all. I can't. Beyond Tina saying, a pebble grain, ankle high. That's where the whole loafer thing comes from.
Yeah, I don't like the loafers. And then he had this other bag with him. Is that in addition to the briefcase? And so I think you mentioned in the book that it's possible that he could have had his own chute with him regardless.
I don't think so. I don't think it was big enough to have his own chute like McCoy took on his escapade. But
and
he had a small yellow, I think it described as a paper bag, like a yellow paper bag. Bill Mitchell said he would put his left hand in and outside that bag, which, I mean, some could say, well, maybe he was left-handed. Braden was predominantly right-handed. I know that a lot of left-handed ran in his family, but I don't want to get into this Arthur Allen weirdness. But that's just what Mitchell said. And he also had what looked like a department store shirt box with him. It was kind of like we could fit like maybe a dress shirt from a department store, but that definitely wouldn't fit another parachute. But who knows what could have been in either of those.
Right.
But exactly. In addition to the briefcase, he had a small yellow paper, what looked like a paper sack, and a department store box. But the descriptions of that kind of vary a little bit.
Absolutely, yeah. No, so the whole thing is wild. So they refuel. He essentially gives them this plan that Mexico City is.
And they said there's no, they wouldn't have enough fuel to get to Mexico, so they split the difference and decided on Reno, Nevada. As the destination.
Yes, exactly. If you want to take a quick question, Crypt Rick, what made Drew want to write a book about this? I'm assuming either DB Cooper or Ted Braden.
Yeah, definitely. You started out as a Cooper fan. That's how I found Ted Braden.
Yep.
And it was like everything else. Like you mentioned, Unsolved Mysteries. Great. I think they did it twice. And one was like maybe a repackage of the first. And the first TV show that covered it that I remember was In Search of with Leonard Nimoy. Now that was in 79, so that was definitely quite a bit before the Unsolved Mysteries version, and that was before part of the DB Cooper money was found on the Tina Bar in 1980. But that's the first time I heard of the case was Leonard Nimoy on In Search of, and then I always liked it. I was always fascinated by it. Absolutely. And then I don't know what finally finding out about Braden prompted me to write about it. But I would listen to Coast AM a lot, and there was a guy on named Galen Cook, and he was talking about his suspect, a guy named William Wolfgang Gossett. He later changed his name from William to Wolfgang, and he's was a good suspect. And Cook was an attorney from I think he's from Seattle, the Seattle area, Portland or Seattle, I think Seattle. And he was really articulate, found out all this stuff about him. Gossett had the turkey neck that Bill Mitchell mentioned and some other interesting things. And he heard about him because Gossett's son had called into Coast to Coast. And then Galen Cook heard that show on Coast to Coast and started developing Gossett as a suspect. And I personally liked him. I was just, I didn't try to further him. I just thought it was cool. I was like, man, this guy sounds like he's onto something. He might have found DB Cooper here. Yeah. And then later comes this stuff about Robert Rackstraw and these team of 480 investigators have it all figured out.
Yeah.
And they do this show about a guy named Robert Rackstraw. And it's called DB Cooper Case Closed. They did a History Channel show. And I remember watching that show thinking, man, I hope they solve this. I think this is cool. I love this case. It's fascinating. The beginning was cool. They did all the history and some old footage of it. And then they started talking about this suspect, Rackstraw, who was in Vietnam. And I love all things Vietnam, man. I love Vietnam movies. Anything Vietnam related, I'm all over it. So I thought this guy sounds as good as any. But then they kind of picked the guy apart towards the end.
Yeah.
And you're kind of left totally deflated. The story just spins totally out of control to where it's so far-fetched. Yeah. So, but all that coming up kind of got me back into the case. And then I was read the DB Cooper message boards, and I wasn't not a contributor on them at all because there's all this bickering, fighting. Your guy's not it. You're my guy's it kind of crap. And a guy named Bruce Smith was talking about Ted Braden on one of the message boards. And Bruce Smith is, he's the grand poobah, godfather. They call him the mayor of Cooperville because he's been, he's a journalist that's been following DB Cooper case for a long, long time. And I wrote a book called DB Cooper and the FBI, which they called the Bible on the case, which I highly recommend. And Bruce was talking to another message board guy that goes under the name Snowman. And they were talking about this dude, Ted B. Braden. And I'm like, wow, I've never heard of this guy. So you started reading some stuff they were saying about him. And they were, because after all the MACV-SOG stuff became declassified, people would go ask these former elite special forces guys. They were like, well, now you can talk. Somebody thought of the brilliant idea of asking him, who do you think DB Cooper was? And every time there was an answer, the name was Ted Braden. It was never, Doug Smith or anybody else. It was always Ted Braden, including the legends, Billy Waugh, John Plaster, special forces legends. They would ask, well, who do you think Cooper was? Because this sounds like, a SOG operation. And they were like, well, it sounds like Ted Braden to us. This guy had balls of steel, which I have up there. That's what Billy Waugh said about Ted Braden. Had balls of steel. Billy Waugh is an American badass legend. This guy was special forces. Wrote a book called Hunt for the Jackal. He did CIA work over in Afghanistan, hunting terrorists. I mean, this dude is he invented the word badass, and he said Ted Braden had balls of steel. I mean, that you couldn't get a bigger compliment from a legend like Billy Waugh. And these guys were saying, these comments from Waugh and John Plaster on the message board. So I said, I was locked in right there. These dudes think this guy's Cooper. I'm going to find out everything I can about him. So that's basically it, Rick. That's what prompted me to write about the book. And it was mainly, I was like, even if this guy turned out not to be DB Cooper, it deserves a book because he's so fascinating. In and of itself. He's just what we do know is mind blowing.
I totally agree. Yeah, it's an amazing read, guys. Make sure you pop over to Amazon, pick this up, leave a review for Drew. If you're into the content I've been covering and you already know what I thought about citing it on the Zodiac, I think you guys would definitely be tuned into this. And even if you just want to learn about DB Cooper, if you haven't heard of the case or even just Vietnam and military history for that on that note. But yeah, I've looked at the known suspects that have been covered on the documentaries, and that once I came into contact with Drew's research on this, I'm like, okay, it's time to deep dive this, because there's no way this many highly qualified people could keep coming up with this answer, and I cannot look at it. My whole thing with Rackstraw is I think he was in San Diego at one point, and they were trying to get him to admit he was Cooper, and
it's pathetic.
He's trying to get money out of them, and my whole thing, I would have loved to got the interview for my YouTube, because I would have been like, dude, tell us if you're not him. I'll pay you to tell us if you're not him. That will just put that to rest, and I'll still put the interview up with you. You know what I mean? But I didn't find out about it till it was too late. So
I mean, my friend Nicholas Broughton, it was a new Rackstraw. He was his pot dealer because Rackstraw had cancer, and he would sell weed to Rackstraw for because he was a cancer patient at the time, and that got Nicky into being a DB Cooper researcher. And he says absolutely not. Robert Rackstraw was not DB Cooper, and that's coming from a guy that knew him well personally. It's not him. The guy treated women like crap. I mean, he would see a woman go by swearing, sexual innuendo, and all that. And Cooper wasn't like that. Cooper respected Tina Mucklow, said very respectful, didn't cuss, very polite. In addition to just being cool under fire. I mean, that's all hallmarks of Ted Braden. So that's just so many things match up with him. Yeah,
absolutely. I asked you behind the scenes about it. It's a rabbit hole, and I'm so interested if this is a hint at all related to the case, or I'll give my breakdown of it. The metal shavings on the Cooper tie, he took off his tie. So for what do we have for forensics? He left the glass he was drinking out of, the cigarette butts, which Drew has covered many times, that the FBI lost, which is not
they lost.
Which the FBI does in big cases like JFK, as I mentioned on our other stream. And he left behind the tie, and then they find these metal shavings on the tie, and I'm like, they try to say he worked in a machine shop, and I'm just wondering if if it is something to do with his background, or if he literally just like walked through one of the hangars that day before getting on the flight. In other words, that he just walked by something and the shavings got on him and it has nothing to do with who he is, like that's where
Yeah,
I'm
it's
like,
with me, the tie is a red herring.
yeah,
I appreciate all the research that the citizen sleuths put into that, particularly
yeah,
a guy named Tom Kay,
mhm,
who uh who made his money like innovating paintball guns or something. I mean, like some brilliant innovation in paintball. The guy did really well on it. Super smart guy, and he just loves the Cooper case. So he did a lot of interesting research into the money find, and can determine that the money had to have been planted during the summer because of the diatoms. I mean, because they're using these high
yes, I
power
heard some of
electron
that. Yep,
microscopes. That's
yep,
that's probably his best find, if you ask me.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
But when you
yeah. He
talk about
smart man.
but yeah, so they put the tie under the powerful electron microscope, and they found pure. The most interesting thing was they found pure titanium.
Mhm.
So people speculated, this is 1971, so they're speculating this guy worked in aerospace or something. But
Yeah,
almost all the titanium in aerospace is alloyed titanium. So that kind of poo-pooed on the whole aerospace industry, but it
yeah,
was like curl shavings and stuff like that. They still haven't traced it. They think it was made using the Hunter process.
mhm.
There is some interesting stuff with Braden that could tie into the tie.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
One is his address pings to Niles, Ohio. Braden was from Toledo, Ohio, but for
mhm,
some reason in his record, he pegs to an address in Niles, Ohio, which was the home of RMI Metals or RMI Titanium, who
mhm.
used the Hunter process, for years and years, way before the 70s and during the 70s. So that's kind of a strange thing that could kind of connect him to the tie. Another one is that Ted Braden's father was a machinist. He was a tool and
Mhm,
die guy,
mhm, mhm,
worked with metals and stuff like that. And
mhm,
Braden was also trained how to do that.
mhm.
And it's believed that he did some of that in between some of his military career was being a metal worker. So
That's
anything's possible. I don't know why they speculate that Cooper, it's a tie that Cooper would have worn at work as some kind of a floor supervisor. That's how it
yeah,
got on there. But why would
yeah.
you wear the tie you wore at work to hijack a plane?
Exactly,
It's kind
exactly.
of a stretch for me.
Yeah, yeah,
Plus, the tie was in FBI custody all those years.
yeah,
The same people that lost the cigarette butts.
yeah,
So how do we know that
yeah.
stuff didn't get on there after
Good
the
point.
hijacking?
Good point. Good point.
I mean, and I'm not this total big conspiracy guy. You know me.
Yeah, yeah,
I like some of it, but you don't want to go too far with it. And I know if you go too far, people get turned off. But this is the same people that at least claim they lost the cigarette butts.
yeah,
And the FBI does not do that. I mean, even though DNA didn't exist back then, we all agree on that.
yeah,
But they would have kept them just as
yeah.
I mean, it's evidence linking him to the crime. I mean, if he just liked that brand, the Raleigh filter tip brand,
Right.
just if he ever went to court, they would need those cigarettes.
Mhm.
Like, well, we understand that you're a heavy, Mr. Johnson, you're a heavy smoker of Raleigh filter tips, and the guy's got a pack in his pocket, and he's like, yeah, so what? Well, DB Cooper did. Okay, where are they?
Did
So they know this thing in the FBI when they try to prosecute people. So it's far fetched that they would have lost them.
I agree. I agree. Were you able to in your research, were you able to tie Braden to the brand of cigarettes found on 305, or did he just smoke what was available in the war theater?
I don't know. I know he obviously smoked cigarettes in Vietnam.
Yeah,
I mean,
his
he
pictures.
smoked a pipe as well. He smoked a pipe quite a bit. Like it would say about Braden, if you saw him outside of his active combat role or in Saigon, you would think he was a colonel or a college professor because he always dressed fastidiously. His appearance was always clean, and he'd wear a coat, he'd smoke this pipe, very sophisticated. And the colonel said that of him, like, man, I thought this guy was some really high up officer until I realized,
Yeah, yeah,
until I knew differently. But
yeah,
obviously in the field he smoked. I got several photographs of him smoking.
yeah,
The one
yeah.
with the
I've seen that.
sunglasses I love.
Yeah.
But the only thing I know is that he smoked Benson and Hedges in the early 60s, because Al remembered that distinctively. And obviously Cooper smoked Raleigh filter tips, which aren't too far off from each other as far as cigarettes go.
And if you've planned out every single aspect of your skyjacking, are you really going to bring up the butts that you smoke personally, or are you just going to switch it up so they have one less thing to connect to?
Yeah, one less thing to tie you to.
Yeah, so
Maybe that's just what he could have had on him, or
yeah.
who
Yep,
knows.
yeah,
But yeah, definitely a smoker.
Yeah,
He's
for
definitely
sure.
a smoker. Braden was a smoker and a drinker. And some of these guys weren't. Richard
Yeah,
McCoy was a Mormon for
Mormon,
crying
yeah,
out loud, but
yeah,
they said, "Oh, he was just trying." I mean, it's so easy just to say he was just trying to throw you off.
yeah, yeah.
Okay,
But
so this guy that
yeah,
never smokes going to go through 8 cigs
yeah,
in a pretty short period.
and do this
Come on,
jump
maybe one.
after,
I mean,
like,
one if
yeah,
you're gonna fake it, but you're gonna
yeah.
go through 8 of these things
And you
as a known non-smoker. Unless he was smoking in the closet back then, because this guy was
no way.
a Mormon Sunday school
Yeah,
teacher. I mean,
exactly.
he's gonna be smelling like smoke.
Well,
It's
drinking,
far fetched,
you
man.
know what I mean?
And drinking.
Like you're gonna be buzzed off those couple of drinks. Your throat's gonna be shot, and then you got to do that.
Yeah,
that
or the
jump, you know,
cigarette. Like if you haven't smoked,
coughing. Yeah,
let's say McCoy smoked in Vietnam.
yeah.
And then he's just gonna pick it up for that to throw
Mm,
people off. You're
mm.
gonna get nicotine poison here. I mean,
Yeah,
smoking 8 of them within 3
yeah,
hours.
yeah, yeah,
That's pretty heavy rate,
yeah,
even
exactly.
for an average smoker. I mean, especially a guy that, let's say, hasn't done it in years or at all. Your eyes are gonna be like,
Yeah, yeah,
it's just,
exactly.
yeah, it's a stretch for me.
And just the irritation of your throat, like you said, with the high altitude, that's going to be difficult breathing as you're free falling down. Anyway, you don't need, like, last thing you need is your throat jamming up, you cough, and then you can't pull your chute. You know. 'Cause,
Hmm.
what was I going to say? So walk. Oh, okay, well, we'll just go. So he jumps, like you said. You hear the pressure bump. There's the 2 jets, what, 2-3 miles back or something. He made them
Yeah. I mean, they couldn't get close enough to actually see him jump,
Yeah,
obviously, but they did track him. I mean, they had the
yeah,
radar at the time.
yeah,
Flight path. I've never seen any real reason to dispute the flight path, or
yeah,
none.
yeah. They
Some
try
people like to
everything.
make that argument, and if you listen to the Vortex, you'll have guys on there. No, it was way over here. It was 3 hours that way. It was 3 hours this way. I mean,
Yeah, he
it's
hit in the landing
insane.
gear and got
Yeah, it's
off
a
the
Victor,
reload.
the
I
Victor
like that one.
23. I believe in the established flight path. There's no
Yeah,
really, there's
same.
no, a lot of pilots have even investigated it. There's just nothing there's nothing good to really spin a theory that the known flight path was wrong.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. No, I agree there. And then so he disappears into thin air, never be seen again. We later on get the letters, which I think you've done some really good work on the comparisons. But talk to us about Tina Barr, this guy and his son finding the bills, and these have been tested, as you said previously. But you went in real in depth in the book, and I heard a lot of things that I didn't really know. It gets weird with their family kind of turns against them when they find the money and they start hating on them and stuff. There's a lot of weird
Oh
extra
yeah, had a
killer.
lot of bad luck. Yeah, it was February 1980, and a family called the Ingrams, who had moved from Oklahoma to Vancouver, Washington, where his sister lived, because they were just kind of looking for new opportunities, a job, make some money or whatever. And it was kind of a cold February, and a guy named Dwayne Ingram knew this place called the Tina Bar, because he had a German Shepherd he'd take down there and kind of run along a beach. He's kind of like a beachfront, it's on the it's along the river there,
Yep.
along the Columbia River. So he knew the spot. So he one day decided to take his family down there, which is I think his sister, his niece, his son Brian Ingram, who was 8 years old at the time, and his wife.
Yep.
And he sent Brian to collect some wood to start a fire, because it's cold. It's Vancouver, Washington in February.
Yep.
And Brian goes to get some wood, and he just peels away a little bit of the top surface of some sand, and he finds this degraded money, and he's like, Dad, what is this? And they came over and looked at it, and there's these decaying $20 bills. There was 3 stacks of $20 bills that still had rubber bands around them, but they were already decaying rubber bands, and the stacks were on top of each other, not spread out. They were on top, 1, 2, 3, and just a couple inches under the surface. They weren't deep at all. Right. And lo and behold, that turns out to be $5,800 of DB Cooper's missing loot. Of course, he goes back, tells his boss, the guy I actually interviewed, first one to ever interview the man's boss from the time, who was still around, which was cool. And he talked to him, and he said, what should I do with this? He said, well, shit, tell the authorities. And he goes, one thing you need to do is keep that money, and that was a good thing that they did eventually get to keep part of that money. So that's the only thing ever found since, was that $5,800. I mean, they thought they found a placard from the 727, but I think that's in dispute. They can't completely tie
it. Could have been any
305.
Yeah. My theory is that might have been from it, but it doesn't really lead anything either way. So what's this thing about they got their house firebombed with a Molotov after they found money? Was that
no? Thing? That's Yuba County Fire.
Oh, okay.
No, that's what Gateway Project got Molotov. No, but they did have a fire. Soon after they had a big run of bad luck. There was a fire at their house on the second floor. It did like $4,000 worth of damage. It was probably pretty significant for 1980.
Yeah.
And they had a lot of bad luck. You know, the media coverage from finding the money got Dwayne in the newspapers, of course, because his son found the money. And there were some people back in Oklahoma that said, hey, this guy was financing a car from us and we haven't received the payment. So they you know, equated that to like grand theft because it was over state lines. And they eventually got all that worked out. His boss was actually an attorney that, you know, at the time he worked for U-Cart Concrete, but his boss, a guy named Joe Tanner, happened to also be a Harvard educated attorney. And he took up, you know, Dwayne Ingram's case against that. And they eventually got that matter cleared up, but it was, you know, really hard on them. And they eventually got to keep like a third of the money, you know, the actual cash that they had to kind of fight for. So Brian auctioned off a lot of the bills over time, and, you know, because now they're going for just stupid money. Stupid money. I don't know how many Brian had number of bills, at least 30. I know he like some of the better
like 28K a piece or something, or something like
one that you could because all the edges are gone around them, but one that you could still see that says 20 on either side. You could probably get 20,000 for it. I mean, and he auctioned off a lot of them maybe 15 years ago, and now they're worth a lot more. But hey, when you need the money, you need the money.
I heard a figure that like if he were to auction off like each one for the max price, he would get more than Cooper jumped with. Like,
that's I never heard that, but it's awesome. True. I'm sure it's true.
Awesome.
I'm sure it's true. Even the little particle pieces that he might have are probably worth a lot of money. And Brian, if you're watching, I sent you a copy of the book. He wanted me to sign a copy of the book, which was cool. I said, Brian, I just want you to, you know, send me a picture of you holding the book because you're the kid that found the money.
Brian,
he's like, thumbs up, I will. I'm still waiting, Brian. Where is it?
Get Drew, Brian. No, he seems like a cool dude.
He's cool. He's super cool. He's really into DB Cooper too. He's got like a whole wall full of Cooper memorabilia and all the old cutout newspaper articles about his family and stuff. And it's really cool. He's got a really cool collection.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Well, I think you debunked it in the book, but what was this thing about the party before the Ingrams went out there? This guy said, "See that guy over there," referring to Dwayne, like him and his son are going to find the, you know, there was this conspiracy theory that some guy knew and he told them. It doesn't seem
that's the convoluted story that basically resurrected Robert Rackstraw as a suspect by a guy named Thomas Colbert, who's also responsible for a Zodiac suspect named Gary Post, who's, you know, about him. And
still haven't done my Gary rant, but
I mean, Rackstraw's a better Cooper suspect than Post is a Zodiac suspect. And
Rackstraw's a better Zodiac suspect than Post is a Zodiac.
And more credible than the Seawaters.
No,
any day of the week.
I've seen how you've been doing them lately. I try to keep up with those videos. That channel's essentially comedy at this point, but I do find it entertaining.
It is. Man. I love going out. I mean, I don't know. I mean, they're probably pretty okay people, but I'm just sorry. I don't buy some of it. But anyway, what you're talking about is how the story came up. How Colbert claims it played out to him is somebody told him about this guy who claimed he was DB Cooper, and then the guy wound up couldn't have been DB Cooper, but knew this other guy, which turns out to be Rackstraw. But the whole story was, you know, it goes back to this thing. This guy said, "Hey, you see this?" And this is, you know, right before the money was found. They were at some it was like a party, like on a beach, not the Tina Bar, but another one in the Vancouver area, and people are drinking and just hanging out. And some guy pointed out the Ingrams, the parents, and said, "Hey, you see that hippie couple over there?" And the guy's like, "Yeah, so what?" He goes, "They're gonna find, they're gonna be on the news soon," or something like that. Like you're gonna see them again soon. Like something big's gonna happen. And a few days later, the Ingrams are on the news finding the money. So they're plants this big conspiracy that the Ingrams were tipped that the money was going to be at the Tina Bar, and then enter this whole Rackstraw theory. And there's Baron de Winter guy that shows up mysteriously in the area that they all knew, and that's supposedly Rackstraw. It's just all nonsense. It's so convoluted. You think the hoax theory is hard to follow. That's nothing compared to this. Baron de Winter and the Ingrams being tipped. And I really don't think honestly, I don't think the Ingrams were tipped. Like I said, I talked to Dwayne's boss. He said he was the nicest, most honest guy you ever met in your life. He goes, I did nothing but help them. They had nothing but bad luck after they found that money. Like you mentioned, the fire. He'd been accused of stealing the car, which wasn't really even true. I don't know if a payment got lost or something, but he was paying on it. So they got it cleared up. He didn't, but it was a lot of bad times for the Ingrams when they found that money. It was a curse.
Yeah, for
Other
sure.
than Brian being able to sell off the bills later.
Yeah, which was that was way later. And that was my whole thing too. If somebody tipped you off, why are you going to go to FBI and tell them you found the Cooper bills? Like, aren't you just going to keep it for yourself and try to like whatever, just spend it or you know what I mean? But black market.
Yeah, the money was pretty degraded and it has a black around it. But I think that when you see the more modern ones, I think that's when they dusted them or something. That's when that happened. But the edges were worn away, and then the debate about how the money got on the Tina bar is a separate mystery.
Yeah,
you have the mystery of who DB Cooper was, and then you have the mystery of how the money got on the Tina bar, because it doesn't line up with the flight path
and motion of the river. It goes the other way. So.
You can't explain how it got there by natural means. It's just it's almost impossible that it got there by natural means. Somebody had to have buried it. Yeah. And it looks like it was buried during the summer, not the winter, because of the diatoms that Tom K found. So it still is an enduring mystery how the hell the money got there. And there was 3 stacks on top of each other. They, no one knows.
Yeah, I don't know if it was on your live stream or in the book that you mentioned that it got caught on the back of one of the river boats theory.
Yeah, that's one theory. Yeah, a river boat.
That's all I could come up with because I got nothing on it.
Yeah, something but it was an established beach, and it's under that part of it now is underwater, I think, but it wasn't back then. It was enough up on, it was it wasn't just thrown up on the beach. It was literally planted in there. So it could not have gotten there naturally. It's almost impossible it got there naturally.
When Cooper landed, could he have been using that pathway on his way out of there, and then he buried it for some reason?
That's an interesting part of it. Like maybe he made his way out that way. Maybe he walked so far, even off of the flight path. Yeah. And I know guys that have been out there like Nikki, Eric Eulis, those guys go out there all the time. I think Eric's gonna be out there digging tomorrow. The dude's like obsessed, man. He's out there with like a couple of guys, metal detectors and shovels. I mean, they're determined they're gonna find like a parachute or a harness or a skull or something. I mean, they think he lived, but they just want to find something, which is cool. That'd be awesome if they did.
We gotta find something.
That would be really awesome.
It's just the problem is it's that Bigfoot area of the Northwest where it's just like unlikely
anything goes out there.
You know what I mean? So you covered Tina Bar. I was looking to do that. I guess what do you want to do? You want to do the trucking stories in Boston, or you want to do the Cooper letters? Which one works better for you?
The letters are good. I like the letters.
Let's go with the letters because I like your research on how you related these similar Braden phrases to these similar Cooper phrases. If I'm not mistaken, is that letter 5 and 6 or?
It's letter 5 and 6, and and this goes back to what you said earlier. He used the name Dan Cooper. DB Cooper was a media screw up because someone overheard it. There was someone mentioned a DB Cooper and they looked at the guy, and then somehow the media AP picked it up. So it just became legend, the name DB, but the hijacker used the name Dan Cooper. And I always believed that if he did write a letter, why is he just going to go grab that moniker that wasn't even the one he used and just say, blah, 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 DB Cooper. Well, the first 4 letters, which are really don't say a whole lot of anything. They're all signed DB Cooper. One's cut out pieces from Playboy magazine. It says the system that beats the system. One is where he said he saw the Grey Cup game and, this kind of thing. And they're all signed DB Cooper. And so is letter number 5. It says DB Cooper. 5 is longer and it's typed and it's, it's saying more. But it's a polar opposite from letter number 6. And 5 and 6 had to be released from a Freedom of Information Act. A guy named Mark Zaid got those letters after being engaged by Thomas Colbert that we talked about for Rackstraw. So Zaid was kind of part of Team Rackstraw at the time, and helping them to get. He's a lawyer and he specializes in getting the FBI to release stuff they don't want to release. So first question is why you have to use a Freedom of Information Act to get a freaking DB Cooper letter. It's ridiculous. I mean, it's stupid, but he did good work and he got those 2 letters released, which are great. And they try to build that into a Rackstraw theory, which I debunk pretty heavily. But on letter number 6, it's, if you read it, it's first of all, it's not signed DB Cooper. It's signed a rich man. And it says in the letter, DB Cooper is not real. DB Cooper is not my real name. And it's the only known letter that says that. It's the only known letter that's not signed DB Cooper, only known letter that says DB Cooper is my real name. And he says, that sentiment is, I had to do something with the skills that Uncle taught me. This is military. What do you mean skills that Uncle's who? Uncle Sam.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And the whole sentiment of that letter is, I had to do something to release the frustration. And that was, I can't join the military anymore. Guess who can't join the military anymore? Who's the best skydiver that ever lived, and also a criminal, a proven criminal. And that's that whole sentiment of that letter is Ted Braden. The letter was postmarked from Florida and Jacksonville. Braden was all over the place. He was a long haul trucker. He got divorced from his second wife in Florida, been in Miami a lot. The guy's all over. Okay. Yeah. Easy to postmark a letter from anywhere. But if you read the sentiments in that letter, he said, I did it for the money. He said, when you read the Ramparts part, which the first half of the Ramparts article is written by a former special forces guy named Donald Duncan, who left Vietnam. He refused a promotion in Vietnam because he got disillusioned with the war. So he comes back and works for Ramparts, and he's a big critic of the Vietnam War. So he winds up interviewing Braden for the magazine, and he writes the first half of the article talking about Braden, and then Braden writes the second half talking about, his experience in the Congo and all this kind of stuff. And when you read the Braden written part, all the stuff comes out that looks exactly like Cooper letter number 6, because Braden liked to insult people in funny ways. He would call the guys in Saigon chair-bound commandos and all these funny phrases. The D.B. Cooper letter says twice, it says lackey cops. It's the way he liked to use alliteration and insult people. And it is just a dead ringer for that letter. I know Ted Braden wrote it. I know he did. It's dead on. It's dead on. He uses Sam singularly in Ramparts. He says, but Uncle Sam is, he never says Uncle Sam. He just says Sam is paying them a bundle. I'm here for the money. He breaks up Uncle Sam as Uncle and Sam. And it's just something that Ramparts does in Cooper letter number 6. Very unusual. Uncle Sam is usually just that, Uncle Sam. Breaking them apart, and these insults that are used in both letter. And I laid this out perfectly in the book. I call them descriptive insult phrases. It's Braden. That's how the guy talked. When he met Donald Duncan, Donald Duncan's, telling his first part of the story. He said, Braden came into my office at Ramparts magazine, says, how you doing, old Dunk? And Donald Duncan that was not his code name in Vietnam. He went by Don, which was short enough. And Braden's calling him Dunk. Well, in letter number 6, it says Unc. Like he uses UNK for Uncle Sam. It's just what Braden did. He would shorten words. So I'm convinced he wrote it.
Yeah, I like the way you laid that out. I probably the letters were like what I knew least about in the case, just because when you watch the documentaries and stuff, they spend so much time on 305, and then at the very end, they're like, then these letters come in, and the documentary's over, and you're like, I would have liked to hear a little bit more about that. But no, I really like the way you laid that out in the book, and especially with the Dunk and the Unk abbreviations. It definitely, for sure, sounded similar without a doubt. Let's get to the spiral out of control of Braden's life when he's like trucking here at the end here, because the only thing I don't like about him as a suspect is I'm actually from Boston. I don't know if you knew that, but when he goes up to Gloucester and gets the fish from the Gloucester meat place. Go ahead.
Gloucester.
Yeah. He goes to Gloucester. He does this, and then he gets the meat. He gets the meat and the
fish and meat. Yep.
And they do the freaking thing where whatever they do the ruse where he has them steal it or whatever, he steals it or whatever.
Yeah.
He gets picked up for that. It sounded very not Cooper-esque to me, but I don't know. Maybe he had some other reason for doing that whole swindle. And then the DWIs, you know what I mean? It just like, I don't know.
He was a maniac. I mean, he was a maniac. He'd get pulled over and he would refuse to give his name. He would. He'd get pulled over for DWI. He'd just say, I'm not telling you. What's your name? Just take me to jail. He's not going to tell him anything.
Yeah, because he knows they're just going to let him out.
He's a hardcore Vietnam guy. He's just like, he refused to give his name. I mean, this guy was just, he was different. He was out there.
Yeah, that was crazy. Yeah, it was just the meat and fit towards the end. Is like
he was a criminal.
Cool. Yeah, that's that.
He was arranging to have his load stolen. He would do that. He would arrange to have his load stolen. He would be hauling whatever he'd be hauling. Yeah, he'd just call up some guys. Hey, I'm going to be over at route number 2. I got a good load of blah blah blah. I'm going to show up late and my trailer's gone. I'll just report it missing, and then divvy up the cash. I mean, so he was a criminal. He was a criminal. There's no doubt about it. Especially after.
It just like It's just like making those stakes, like that thing, and getting the DUIs, and then okay, so you
I don't
said,
think he cared at that point. I mean, just
yeah,
honestly, I'm not trying to cover up for a negative, but I don't think
yeah,
he cared. I
yeah,
think he was so. I think he was really mentally ill by that time too.
yeah,
I really
yeah.
do. I think he was mentally ill in Vietnam.
The,
Kind of got that impression from Jim Hetrick, who was his assistant team lead. He said
yeah,
Ted, what he really was like, he had a lot of animosity towards Ted Braden, almost got him
yeah,
killed so many times. And he said,
yeah,
you know, I hated the guys for so long. He goes, but that was just such a screwed up war. And I knew he was mentally ill. So I just finally made peace with it in my mind and just said,
yeah,
you know
yeah,
what?
yeah,
We're just victims of this terrible war kind of thing. But
yeah.
he said he was mentally ill. He
Yeah, I
really
think you
was.
had a really good quote from him at the end, if I'm not mistaken, or near there. Yeah, it's just that. So I believe they're prosecuting him for the truckloads stolen, and then you said he was in Penn, locked up in Penn.
Loretto. He was in Loretto Federal Penitentiary in Loretto, Pennsylvania, if I'm saying that right, in Loretto. And we don't know
charge.
exactly why.
Yeah,
I don't know if
yeah,
that had anything to do with the fish and meat. He wasn't in there that long though.
yeah,
It's a little unclear, but he wasn't in there for like 10 years or five, even
yeah,
5.
yeah.
You know, it still seemed like he had something of a get out of jail free card.
Yeah, because he got let out of both, like whatever that was,
Yeah,
plus nothing
whatever it is.
came of
Yeah, he got
me, right?
leniency. He
Yeah,
did. I think he
yeah,
knew that. I think that's one thing that would explain it. Like even the Cooper heist, like he was just built that way. He wouldn't have been nervous. 2, he knew if he
yeah,
got caught, they were gonna have to let him go because
yeah.
he not only knew what they were doing over in Vietnam, I was told he knew what was going on globally. I mean, because he
Oh
was
yeah, I
plugged
believe
in
it.
at the top. He had high
Yeah,
up friends at the Statement Department, not just Singlaub. I think
yeah,
that was a special one. But I mean, when Harold K. Johnson intervenes on your behalf, you got friends in high places.
yeah,
And I'm sure
absolutely.
there was people that didn't like him, and I don't know why they just didn't kill him. And it was probably just because those high power friends said, no, he's going to live.
Yeah, because I think he's just so decorated in what he did in MACV-SOG with like the the wiretapping, and it's like all of that. And even regardless of how your character becomes at the end of your life, it's like when you have that, you're like, this guy's a proven hero. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like nothing really as bad is gonna happen to you. But it certainly seemed like a CIA spook cover up to me, the way you laid it out. I was listening to the Vortex, and I think it was either Kay or that other gentleman that you mentioned, and he was saying like if anybody has a suspect that they want me to, I think, pull the FOIA request
Zaid, yeah,
on.
Mark Zaid.
I wanted to ask you because I figured you're the person that did anybody ever try it to Braden, or if you asked FBI for a
I
FOIA?
don't know. I did send some things to him,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
he's probably got a big backlog. And my personal feeling is he's still kind of rooting for Rackstraw.
yeah,
So I don't know how hard he's going to push on another suspect. That's
yeah,
just
yeah.
coming from me, Mark. If you're out there, but I
I'd
did
love to
send
see what
him.
comes
I
up
did
on
send
that
him some
file.
information on Braden. Of course, he was part
Yeah,
of the same podcast I was on.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
The
That was the one I listened
Disappeared.
to. Yeah,
Yeah, that
stuff's
Zayd
amazing.
was on, and that was
Stuff's
all
amazing.
about Ted Braden. Yeah, it was
Stuff's really
great.
good.
Chris
Yeah.
Williamson did a great job of that. But
Yeah.
things develop more. I mean, I'll tell you, I've been working a guy for literally since I wrote the book. If you remember, I wrote the book and I talk about a guy that heard something about Ted Braden, and I gave him an alias to protect him.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but it's all true. It was in the book when it was written, and he said,
Mm-hmm.
this guy, former Special Forces, wasn't SOG, but he was former Special Forces, knows John Plaster, who was Special Forces legend. It's hard to beat him. Him and Billy Waller, 2 of the top guys you think of when you think of Vietnam Special Forces guys.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And he told him, I know something about Ted Braden that it's just stunning. And he told him that, because he called him about Braden after I called him, because he's like, yeah, I heard of the guy, but now you got me really interested. And I said, well, yeah, Plaster and Waugh think he was DB Cooper. And he said, well, I know Plaster. I'm going to call him right now. This is over a year and a half ago, mind you. And he called Plaster. Plaster said, I know something about Braden, blow your mind. And he said, well, tell me. He says, I can't tell you over the phone. He's like, are you kidding me? He goes, why not? He goes, I just can't. He goes, I'll tell you when I see you in person. Well, these guys don't live in the same state. It's during COVID. He goes, I don't know when I'll see you again. He goes, well, you just have to wait. Well, I'd follow up with this guy every 6 months or so. Hey, did you ever hear from him? Blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
So I did that about 2 months ago or so. I just sent him an email. Hey, did you ever hear from John? My phone rings about an hour later, and it's the guy calling. He's not emailing back. He's calling.
Yeah.
He's like, yeah, that thing you were talking about? I said, yeah. Did you ever see him? He said, well, I talked to a guy. He's being really kind of like blurring it a little bit.
Yeah.
And I said, well, what did he say? He said Ted Braden was DB Cooper. And he said it really fast. And I was like, wait, I thought I heard it wrong. I said, you said Ted Braden was not DB Cooper? He said, no, Ted Braden was DB Cooper. A guy told me. And I said, was it John Plaster? And he goes, Plaster doesn't know anything. A MACV-SOG told me. They don't think it was Ted Braden. He goes, they know it was Ted Braden. It was kind of wink, wink. It was Plaster, but he's giving him some cover, but it was on a phone call. He said, no, they don't think. He said, they know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was me getting a peek behind the curtain. And, that's all hearsay and whatever. And people say, oh, you just want to sell another book or something. That's all bullshit. It took me a year and a half to work this guy. I've got all the proof of it. And it's legit. This guy knows these guys, and it explains why. And not just because Ted Braden was such a badass and was smart. He was very smart. He had a GT score of 150. There was the second highest that Hank Birch ever saw as a commander. Wow. But it explains why all these ex-special forces guys never named a number 2. They always said number 1 because certain people knew it was Braden. They were tipped because out of MACV-SOG, there's dudes that were badass, man. They could do this thing upside down too. Yeah, Braden was probably the best skydiver that ever lived, but you didn't have to be that good to pull Cooper off, and you just had to have the idea. So why do all these guys only give one name? Because they knew it. And I mean, not just, we're talking several. I could talk about Jason Hardy, who wrote a MACV-SOG storybook, A Clandestine Army, which are these $100 to $200 picture books, like these rare photographs of SOGs in the field. And I mean, he had to go to the families to get this stuff. He has a store called the Dog Tag where they sell all this MACV-SOG and Special Forces memorabilia authentic to the period in Vietnam. This guy's talked to so many ex-special forces it would blow your mind. And he said not one of them gave another answer for who they thought Cooper was. All of them said Ted Braden. All of them.
Yeah. No,
why not? Ted Braden was good, but there was also this other guy named so-and-so. Never
top
happened.
5 or something, Never. Top 3
only
even.
one name and that explains it because there's certain guys that were in the know.
That being said, I know you've addressed it before, but I'm just wondering if the big question is they're going to come to you or any other person with a solid Cooper suspect, and I do think you have the best one, is placing him in Seattle, Portland. Did you ever come up with anything on Braden with any connection to the Northwest or, like just even familial or work, any of that stuff?
Well, work there where he at the time, we believe he was working for Consolidated Freightways as a long haul trucker. Consolidated Freightways was headquartered in Portland, Oregon.
Oh, that's right.
And then later moved across the river, just right across the Columbia River to Vancouver, which is
same
DB
area.
Cooper hot zone. So Portland, same area. So at the time it looks like he was working for Consolidated, which if you were a long haul trucker for Consolidated, that didn't require you to go to corporate, as you might call it, but it could have. So, there's a tie there. There's also a tie with a former MACV-SOG, not a teammate of Braden's, but a friend, a guy named Richard Jenkins. And that's a whole nother conspiracy I got to do a video on. But this guy but this guy was former MACV-SOG. His nickname was Big Jinx because he was a tall guy. I mean, SOG, there's a guy named John Stryker Meyer, who's an ex-SOG legend, who's pretty tall. They didn't like him that tall in SOG because you had to get inserted up on helicopters and stuff. You didn't want to be that heavy. But this dude was one tall guy, the tallest guy that was ever in SOG. So his nickname was Big Jinx. And he had a private plane and lived in Vancouver at the time. So he could have been really useful for Braden, and those guys were in combat. So, I mean, you probably trusted him as much as you could anybody.
Yeah,
so, that's just speculation on my part, but that's possible.
Yeah, that's pretty good. There were a couple comments about it, I think, when we were talking about this guy who tries to insert himself in the narrative of dropping off the parachutes, and I believe you debunked that as well.
Oh, there's a whole crazy controversy over
rabbit hole there.
The ownership of the parachutes. Between Norman Hayden and Earl Cossey. And Earl Cossey was the FBI's right-hand guy. He was the expert to the FBI in the Cooper case on the parachutes, and he claimed that he supplied the parachutes. Well, later, the ownership of those parachutes were called into question when a book was written by a guy named Jeffrey Gray called Skyjack, which is still the best-selling DB Cooper book to this day. It was a New York Times bestseller. It's just a great book. It's good on research, but it's good on all the little side stories that are so great. Brian and all that. But that called in question the legitimacy of Earl Cossey's claims And he always claimed that Cooper was a no pull. He was an experienced skydiver. I packed those parachutes. One of them was one of the front chute was a training chute that was sewn shut, which was later debunked too. And strangely, Earl Cossey was found murdered in his garage, and I think that was 2003 or so. So way after the Cooper skyjacking, of course, people think, wow, I wonder if that had anything to do with him kind of getting debunked after the book Skyjack came out. But he was found murdered in his garage, violent. I think he was hit with a hammer or something. And
trauma, I think you said in the book.
Yeah, like blunt trauma to the head. And they found his wallet. Somebody found his wallet a few weeks later in a dumpster, and they mailed it back to the family anonymously. Really weird conspiracy shit. But yeah, I mean, somebody murdered crazy. Earl Cossey.
Yeah. I know you mentioned that at the end, and you didn't push it too hard. You kind of like left
conspiratorial, but it did happen. The guy was murdered, and it's strange. And that was his claim to fame was the parachutes. Yeah, and they're called into question about Norman Hayden said that he owned them and that he had them sent over with a taxi. It's convoluted. It was actually hard to write because it's still not completely vetted out. Who actually owned them and maybe one of the guys packed them, but Norman Hayden actually owned them and Cossey packed it there. It's crazy.
Yeah, it was the first. He took credit for it, and then somebody else said it was them.
But Cossey was the FBI's mouthpiece for the parachutes for years and years. He helped them build that narrative that Cooper was inexperienced. He was a no pull. He just augured into the ground. That's why he never even pulled the ripcord. That's why you can't find him or the parachute. He just in a crack somewhere in the and it was almost like they wanted him to do that. They wanted him to be the mouthpiece, and then his credibility got shot to shit when Skyjack came out, and then shortly thereafter he's murdered. So
I thought that was weird. An interesting note that you had in there, and then they were kind of talking about it in the comments, so I figured I would mention it. It felt to me like I can't say like I don't know either way, but it felt connected even loosely some way to me, just because he could have died of old age, so
they never, that's the thing about it. Did he live or did he die? They never found anyone. All those years of hunting in the woods and never found a parachute, never found a skull, never found a body. I mean, of course you could say he landed in the river and just washed out to the sea, possible, but there was never anyone missing that could have lined up with any jump experience. So no one ever reported someone missing that it was like, oh, this guy,
Yeah, for sure. I know there was that lake there. I forget the name of it. I'm
Merwin.
Sure. Yeah, they thought there was like an object floating in the lake, so that he fell and drowned in the lake. Quite frankly, I think if you fell and drowned in the lake, it'd probably be easier to find your body than if you're a random like uncharted area of mountains.
Yeah, like would it float or or part of it would. I mean, or it's
even
strange.
The water would preserve the bones. So you know what I mean? It's like anyway. But
nothing found.
Exactly. So we've had Mr. Beeson for a while. If there's any other final questions for Mr. Beeson, feel free to ask. And we're on Paratrooper of Fortune, story of Ted B. Braden. I highly recommend that you guys pick this up. Leave Drew a Amazon review. Head on over to the Drew Tube. Subscribe over there. He's been doing tons of amazing stuff on I'm sure he's got Yuba County 5 coming up, the missing persons, and you had Fred Manali a while back. Of course, he has the Zodcast. Oh, head over to the Subscribe Star. What is the Subscribe Star? Is it Zodcast?
Yeah, Zodcast on Subscribe Star. Yeah.
Yep. Get him over there. I'll drop the links here and below. Make sure to subscribe there and support this guy's work because he's amazing. He's been super generous with his time. Any other? Oh, I was going to ask if you had any other like DB Cooper related books, but I know you mentioned Skyjack because I know you had the
Skyjack is great. Yeah, Skyjack is great. DB Cooper and the FBI is fantastic. There's a new guy that has a book out. God, I can't even remember his name offhand. I haven't bought it yet, but it's really into the details of it. It's brand new. You can't miss it. It only comes out on paperback. It's the latest one put out. I can't remember this guy. Darren Schaefer interviewed the guy on the Vortex. If you want to definitely go to the Cooper Vortex. Yeah, all those episodes are free. And I did 2 of them, but they're all great. I like every one of them. But I definitely, other than mine, of course, I definitely listened to the one that's from a guy named Mark Metzler, who's an avid parachutist. You learned so much from listening to that guy.
Awesome. And then you were on Disappeared. That was a great episode. You can check that out on Spotify or wherever you guys consume podcasts. That was an amazing one too. Basically
Vanish. Yeah, that's
Vanish. Oh, my bad.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Vanish
Vanish.
podcast.
That was great. Yeah, it was amazing. So yeah, guys, I hope you are happy. I'm happy to get some Cooper content up here on the tube because I was so depressed when I didn't see it. It was the first thing I said to Drew. I was like, hey, there's nothing on the internet about that. I mean, I can kind of understand why, because it's not something the FBI is going to be promoting, but at the same time, like, on the final note, I think it was the Rackstraw thing or one of the documentaries where they were basically saying, like, if this guy's 80, 90 years old, we're not gonna prosecute him anyway. And so that's
you can't prosecute a dead man. He can't stand trial. I mean, even if you got DNA, you can't. I mean, they just consider the case closed.
Yeah,
you cannot be prosecuted when you're dead.
Even if it was like an old guy. They said they weren't like going to do much about it if it was some 90-year-old guy. So that's why they were trying to get Rackstraw. They were like, "Come on, dude, they're not going to do anything to you anyway."
Yeah, my friend Nicky, who knew him, he said that the whole Colbert team tried to get him to plant evidence on his houseboat. I don't know what that would have been. Maybe they got an extra 20 from Ingram.
That's hilarious. Oh my God.
Nicky said that. Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, they were so desperate. I mean, they offered him money, just confess, dude. We'll give you a 50 grand or
I would have paid him just to tell us it's not him and put it right up on the tube.
And they got Tina Mucklow to do the show. I don't know if it was History Channel or those people. And they put that whole table full of photographs of Rackstraw in front of Tina Mucklow, and she destroyed them. Like, that's not him. I mean, no bones about it. She quickly said, that's not him at all. Of course. It was a gut punch. They tried to spin it later. No, she was tired that day or something.
Yeah. It was her memory. Yeah. It's like, no, like if you were sitting next to him that long and that's a once in a lifetime event, even years later, you're still gonna remember it.
She filleted him.
There was a question Rick was asking about any DB docs on YouTube. I know there's not many. There's like the BuzzFeed one. There's Unsolved Mysteries you can pull up if you haven't seen
Unsolved Mysteries is good. The In Search of's on there too. That's a good early one.
I'll check that. Yeah. I like
they talked to one of the passengers, guy named with last name Simmons, who walked by Cooper. It was kind of cool.
Nice.
So In Search of's a good one. That's the first one I started with, but there's a few. Bruce Smith stuff is really good. He does one all about the money find on the Tina Bar and goes through all that minutia, which is good. Bruce Smith, Tina Bar money find. If you YouTube that is really good. And I mentioned Mark Metzler. There's him doing a presentation at one of the Cooper cons from about 4 or 5 years ago, which is great too.
Nice. I'll try to check. I know there's Decoded. I think you had.
That's about Kenny Christensen.
Yep, absolutely. So check it out, guys. Do your research. Most importantly, start with this. And till next time. I don't know what me and Drew will be doing. I'll have to find somebody else that can do Cooper, but I'm sure we'll be back on Zodiac soon.
We will.
As long as there's no Gary Francis post announcements.
No post and no sea waters hanging out in the car. And
we're gonna no hanging out in the car. Yeah, I know. We're gonna stick to the facts on our reporting, guys. But shout out to everybody who came through. There's a whole bunch of people, and appreciate you guys in the comments. And like, sub, share. Till next time. Thank you.